Hello, welcome to this webinar on the study skills that support the student with dyslexia at second level. My name is Wynne McCormick. It is one of 9 YouTube webinars on dyslexia at second level. I recommend to everybody, be they teachers or parents, to view the webinar on dyslexia at second level first. It outlines the challenges facing the student at this level, and then to go to view the others that are of interest to them. This particular one is relevant to students, parents and teachers. It is the only one aimed at students specifically in the series, so I am just addressing them primarily, although parents and teachers will find parts of it useful as well. There will be some overlap with other webinars in the series. There are specific webinars for teachers on topics such as memory, writing, reading, and these topics are covered here as well. Much of the webinar is based on the study skills workshops I ran for many years for senior cycle students with dyslexia. During these workshops, we developed strategies that the students found exceptionally helpful. The students also contributed to the content of the workshop, giving feedback that makes the workshops more targeted, practical and relevant. Many thanks to the students I met during those years and the ideas they gave me. As in all the webinars, if I mention links, they will be below the YouTube presentation. So the topics I'm covering in this webinar are, firstly, what students reported the difficulties they experienced were. And then I will outline the underlying principles of what works for these students. Then I will look at strategies for organisation, note-taking, memory, writing, reading and spelling and vocabulary. Here I'm going to mention some of the difficulties that students have encountered. No student will have all these difficulties, but many might be affected in several ways. With reading, it may be slow. They may need to reread the text in order to make sense of it. They can make mistakes when reading, particularly if they're tired or stressed. I once had a 6th year student who said she could not make sense of the textbook the night before when she was tired. It was only in the morning she saw that she was misreading the word forest as first. Some will put every word down on the page and put the effort into decoding each word. And then at the end, they don't know what has been said. The effort went into decoding and comprehension was lost. Sometimes due to a lack of vocabulary, since they don't read for pleasure, when they come to long words they don't know, they jump over them, and this doesn't help comprehension. Their written work may be too long or too short. It may be unevenly planned and meander. It may be hard to follow what they're saying. And then as they write, they come to a word they cannot spell, so it leads to a cross out and substituting an easier word. So it makes the writing stilted. Because they've stopped to think about the spelling, the ideas that they had in their head vanish, and they find it hard to get back on track. Sometimes their mind is working faster than their pen and they leave words out. At the time that they were meant to be learning grammar and punctuation and paragraphing, they were too busy learning to read, and these may be missing in their work. Often, if they proofread their work, they don't see the mistakes they've made. Sometimes they don't take the time to analyse the question and decide on what they're being asked. They might panic, see a word they know, and then write everything they know down, but it doesn't answer the question. Handwriting may be difficult to read even for them, and sometimes due to an unusual grip they might get muscle strain. They experience difficulties in getting information and ideas into long-term memory. They learn with patterns and understanding. Learning by rote may be much more difficult, such as learning Shakespearean quotations or scientific equations. Note-taking can be a major problem. They find it difficult to take notes if the teacher calls them out. They may not be able to spell the words the teacher is saying, and this can cause gaps in their notes. Handwriting may be poor, so the notes may be illegible. And sometimes they can't multitask here. They can either take notes or listen and understand what the teacher is saying. They can't do both. If taking notes from the board, they find it hard to decipher the teacher's cursive handwriting and may fall behind. Second level teachers are not noted for their clear handwriting on the board, unlike their primary school colleagues. When taking notes from a textbook, their reading can come against them. They might not have the confidence to identify the key points and feel insecure about omitting anything. So the notes they take are nearly as long as the textbook itself, which doesn't help. Being organised may be a problem. They forget their books, their equipment, the homework they've done. Their locker and bag are a mess. Notes are not filed away. They might find it hard to organise their time and can waste time. They can feel anxious about how much needs to be done. They need one diary, whatever form it takes, or else they can double or treble book themselves for their sports, social and school life. Spelling and vocabulary may be a problem. Since many do not read for pleasure, their vocabulary may be somewhat limited. Anxiety and tiredness increase the difficulties. The school day can take a lot out of them, and they still have to face into homework, and they can feel overwhelmed at times. The English paper in the Leaving Cert is the first paper of the exam. For most students, it's a paper to ease them into the exam. It is comprehension and essay writing. For the majority of the students on the Study Skills Workshop, it was the paper they dreaded the most. They would much more prefer to face an exam equipped with the knowledge they had learned. This paper was challenging for them. Due to processing difficulties, they might have to concentrate when listening to the teacher. The class can appear to be going much faster for them than it is for others, and they can get lost when a series of instructions is given. They may need time to retrieve the right word or answer when asked a question. This slower processing and the need to retrieve information can lead to difficulties when presenting or when doing interviews. Sequences such as the alphabet or months of the years may pose difficulties. One of my sons asked me when he was in senior cycle, did August come before October? And then, despite great effort and hard work, they have very little to show for it, and that can be so disheartening. I think I'm going to surprise you. On the students' workshop, as an icebreaker, we would ask them how did dyslexia affect them, and they would produce a list somewhat like this below. And then we'd ask them, you have one vote. Which one of these difficulties causes you the most problems? In over 90% of the workshops over the years, the same difficulty came to the top of the list. Just take a second and decide which one you would think it would be. When I do this on In-Service for Teachers, it's only a small minority of teachers who identify the correct one. It was memory. Does that surprise you? Besides the dyslexia, there can be related difficulties. They may have faced considerable difficulties, particularly if they were not identified early as being dyslexic. I have known many students who were not identified until they were at second level. They could feel very alone in class from about the age of 7 or 8 when others were learning to read easily and they seemed to be the only ones not getting it. Sometimes teachers might have recognised their potential and suggested that they were lazy or lacking in motivation, and these could lead to feelings of anger and frustration or feeling stupid. They may be very tired during the school day because the tasks of reading and writing and listening are hard work. Attitudes to schoolwork go the whole way across the spectrum for them, from those who want to give up because it's such hard work to those who try even harder and become perfectionists and spend excessive time on schoolwork. I have met first-year students who spend 4 hours a night, which is far too long for them. Here are some broad principles on what works for students with dyslexia. Firstly, I would say that many of the strategies are not just for school, but they are for life. When someone with dyslexia finds a strategy that reduces the confusion and helps them, they hold on to it for dear life and it becomes a life strategy. Much of what I recommend will apply to all students, you'll see that, but for the student with dyslexia, these strategies are essential. Ways to reduce the verbal content and help get visual information are invaluable. So, mind maps, graphic organisers, lists and key points, revision books, mnemonics, hooks to hang information on, templates for written answers, all of these help. And then clear boundaries to the work to be done helps, such as the revision books where you can see the outline of the entire course and where this piece of learning fits in. They may need help to improve their time management with homework and revision timetables. Their time management will improve if their work area, their bags and their lockers are well organised with all necessary equipment close by. They need a system to check that they're bringing everything they need into school. A single diary, which could be their phone or a diary or a wall chart with all commitments on it, is essential. And then they must recognise they cannot cram. It leads to feelings of being overwhelmed and anxiety. Steady, consistent progress is the way to go. Using as many senses as possible to help get information into long-term memory also helps. Lastly, knowing their profile of abilities is really helpful. Being aware of the strengths and weaknesses in their profile can help them use those strengths to overcome the weaknesses. Many students with dyslexia on the workshop knew they were dyslexic, but they did not know their profile of strengths and weaknesses. And yet, when they go into third level, they will need to let access officers know about their dyslexia, about their strengths and weaknesses, and what would help. The WISC-5 is often the cognitive test used in psychoeducational assessment. There are 5 sections in it. Here are the results for a girl whose name is not Maria, that I met several years ago. She had had some additional teaching when she was at primary level because she had some reading difficulties, and she came into secondary. And again, she got some additional teaching. She was very ambitious and wanted to achieve academically like her friends. But by the end of second year, she was very downcast. Her parents decided to get an assessment, and the WISC results are in percentile scores, and they're given here. 50 is the average score, so that anything above 50 is above average. She has 3 areas well above 50, but 2 of her scores were very low. This explains her reading difficulties. Understanding this profile of ability, that she had strengths, but there were weaknesses, really helped her. The strategy for her would be to use those strengths to help her overcome the weaker areas. On the workshop, we asked the students, did they understand their assessment and their profile of strengths and weaknesses, and what caused them the most problems? And we had questionnaires that helped with this. There were 2 pages in that questionnaire, and it covered the key areas of organisation, learning, note-taking, etc. And it asked the student to think about what exactly caused them the difficulties in these areas. For example, many students would say they just couldn't write, that they found writing difficult. But it's better to try to drill down and see exactly what part of the writing task was causing the difficulty. So here you'll see on the questionnaire, we had about 7 or 8 different questions to get them to think about the writing task. This is not a comprehensive list, but it might be a starting point. Here are some ideas to help with organisation. I've already mentioned that the use of a diary or an organiser for everything in their life, and also that they cannot cram. Both of these are so important, I mentioned them a second time. They will make mistakes about commitments in different aspects of their life unless they have that single diary. And then it has to be solid, consistent progress. Otherwise, cramming can lead to anxiety and being overwhelmed. Putting up to-do lists and deadlines on the wall of their study area will ensure that they do not forget things. And then using colour will help make things more memorable and easier to navigate. Here is one example of where they can use colour. This is a coloured timetable. The student has filled in the colours of the subjects. It means they don't have to look at all the words on their timetable. They know where they're going by the colour on the page. They could make 3 copies of it, and they put 1 in their locker, 1 in their homework journal, and 1 in their work area at home. I also recommend that when they do it, they put the names of their teachers in the first time a subject is mentioned. Otherwise, they know the teachers as Sir or Miss, and it's hard for them to remember the teachers when it comes to a parent-teacher meeting. They use these colours for their subjects. So for maths, they'll put a yellow tag on their maths copy and a brown tag on their English copy. And it means that they save maybe 20 seconds every time they go to the locker to find a copy, and they find their maths copy in a set of 20 copies. But it's 20 seconds 9 times a day, and the same time saving is there at home when they're looking for something. Their maths notes are in a yellow folder, their English notes are in a brown folder. Next, I'm going to talk about 3 things that the students found really useful and appreciated on the course. A homework and revision timetable, a master goal sheet for revision, and the use of SMART goals when learning. Here I've made up a suggested homework timetable for a first year student. I would say it needs to be realistic. I've come across plenty of students who would make up a fantasy homework timetable that they don't keep to. I like that the work is done as at a routine time each day, and that here in this one he does it at 4:30 every day except Tuesday when he has sports. I like them to identify a time at the weekend that they would do their homework. Too many students spent the weekend notting, in other words, not doing their homework, and yet it's in their head. They start off on Friday and say, we'll do it today, but later. But then they say, oh, it's the weekend, we'll give themselves an out. I'll do it tomorrow morning. But then, being typical teenagers, they sleep in. They have sports on Saturday afternoon, and so it goes into Sunday. But there's a family visit, and they end up doing their homework on Sunday night, but it's been in their head the entire time. I much prefer that they have a defined time to do it, and the rest of the weekend is free time for them. I've also included in this timetable subjects for revision. For example, after midterm in November, with 6 weeks to go to the Christmas exams, they could allocate subjects to particular nights and ensure that they cover all their subjects in the week. Here I give an example of a revision master sheet. Students can feel overwhelmed and anxious about how much they need to know. They can feel it like a black cloud over them with no idea about the size of it. This is an attempt to change that. Take a first year student coming back in after midterm in November, 6 weeks to go to the Christmas exams. They ask all their teachers what is coming up in the exams. They have a single sheet of paper and they have each subject as a heading, and then they write down what is coming up in each paper. Now the black cloud has been quantified. They know the size of the task ahead. This reduces anxiety. When they sit down in the evening to study, it helps them become much more organised. They don't have to waste time thinking about what will I study. They have allocated particular subjects to particular nights. So if it's Monday, the next item will be on science and in Spanish, and they will do it, and then they mark it off. And as the weeks pass, they will see that they're making progress, and it can lead to a dramatic reduction of anxiety. They will see that they will cover all their revision by the exams. The students on the workshop thought this was a brilliant idea. Many of them weren't doing it, even those in Leaving Cert, but thought that they would do it from that point on. The next strategy that the students on the workshop liked was this one, which is SMART goals. And the SMART goals comes from the words specific, measurable, action related, realistic and time-based business concept. But it is this: an awful lot of students, if they're asked to do a chapter of, say, Luther in Junior Cert, they'll say, I'll give it 30 minutes and I'll read it over 3 times. And if they read it over 3 times, the good readers have a good idea at the end of that. The poorer readers have a less good idea, but it does begin to fade. It is far better that they use the same 30 minutes to actually set goals for what they're going to learn in that time. So they might set out that they will learn the 5 causes of the Reformation, 5 beliefs he had, 5 facts about his life, and that at the end of the 30 minutes they would test themselves on those facts, and that information will stay in their head longer than just reading over. Here are some ideas about filing and note-taking. File the notes daily, a file for each subject, and maybe a colour label on the spine so it's easy to identify. In the front of the file you could have an index with the topics and the dates, and at the back of it you could have a glossary with the keywords or spellings or definitions, so it's easy to revise those facts. Don't fold the notes, because otherwise after a time you'll have a mound of notes that have to be unfolded to find the ones you want. Leave plenty of space. Include headings and subheadings and colour to make it memorable. There is a great benefit in having good notes. They help with learning, but they also help in structuring answers for assignments and in exams. Some ideas for taking notes in class. If the teacher is calling out notes and you miss a word, just leave a gap and move on and continue to take the notes, and then at the end of class ask the teacher what the word was. Having your own sets of abbreviations can help. For example, Enviro for environmental, it saves you some time. If you find it hard to take the notes down in time from the board, ask for extra time, or could you take a photograph of the board? For the student who finds it hard to take notes and to understand what the teacher is saying, could you concentrate on listening to the teacher and get your notes some other way? And then there is the asking for help form from the Department of Education. This asking for help form is 2 pages long, and it can help the student communicate with the teacher about what would help them. For example, you look at this with suggestions about what might help. So it says, I think I'd do better in your class if you let me sit closer to you, if you gave more information on the handouts, if you spoke slower, and so on. Here the asking for help form continues. It says, for example, I think I'd do better with your homework if you let me hand it in as mind maps, or if you let me write less than others, if you just let me write the answers and not the questions, and so on. If the student cannot make legible, clear notes, how will they get the key points? Can the teacher give out notes? This has happened more since COVID. Or can they get photocopies of the work of other students? This is what I did for my lads and also for students in my school. And then revision books. are really useful with key points. And I'd be looking at copies of revision books that are more accessible with more bullet points, the numbering of points, less text, the highlighting of keywords and concepts, colour and diagrams, bigger print, a dyslexia-friendly font maybe, and plenty of space for the information on the page. I particularly like that fourth one there, the Essentials Uncovered, who have revision books for the sciences. There are websites that will help with notes, and here are some of them. Studynotes.ie has notes across many subjects, and then LitCharts. They have study notes, but they've also got this wonderful thing, which would be a modern English translation of Shakespearean plays. SparkNotes has notes, but they're for the UK system. The Business Guys have notes in accounting, economics and business, Duolingo for languages, the Conical Flask and the physics teacher for the sciences, etc. And then Connemara FM have podcasts for English, the poets, French, chemistry, classical studies, etc. Touch typing is a boon for students with poor handwriting, and certainly typewritten notes are much clearer than handwritten notes. I didn't mention at the beginning of this webinar that I have some dyslexic characteristics, though I was never formally identified. One is that I can't tell left from right. I don't know if this is why my handwriting has always been so bad. However, I learned to touch type in my late teens, and it is such a liberation, I think, and it appears on the screen in front of me. I could never have written the books or the hand fact sheets without being able to touch type, so I recommend it. The software TTRS is a multisensory structured online course designed to teach touch typing, but it is also helping with reading and spelling and writing, and it's available from the library service. Here I'm talking about the reading or the scanning pen. There are two versions. One is an orange one, and it only reads aloud or through headphones. The second reads aloud, but also it does this. A student could scan key points in from a textbook into the pen and then download them that night so they could make notes without having to handwrite them. It's available from EdTech, and there's more information on the site scanningpens.co.uk. Mind maps and graphic organisers and GoodNotes all help with learning and in writing answers. Mind maps and graphic organisers particularly make the information very visual. Here I mention a site called worksheetworks.com, and as you can see from the piece down here, it says thousands of worksheets, millions of combinations, and down at the very end of it, it has a place where you can access graphic organisers, get blank ones and customise them to what you want. The PDST book on graphic organisers, link is given as link 2, is a book on graphic organisers, and they have both filled in ones like these ones here, but also blank ones that students could use. I particularly like that one about digestion. The students on the course particularly liked the one there about the comparative text for English in the Leaving Cert, where again you can see the structured information in that particular Venn diagram will be very helpful when you are writing. Cornell University designed this way of taking notes that is very clear for students, and I give a link to it there. And what they say is to divide the page in 3, and in one part you put keywords, and in another part you put the notes, and down at the end you put a summary. Many students with dyslexia are reluctant to make mind maps or reduce material down to key points. But I like this idea if you're thinking about mind maps. This is from Student Enrichment, which are an organisation that do study skills in schools around the country. And they show different ways to summarise information. They have a passage of work, and then they show you could do it in an outline form, or in a diagram form, or as a mind map. And they say which way appeals to your mind best, and the student can see which way they would prefer to get information. I think that's a good idea. Stressed learners like the security of the textbook, and they find it hard to reduce it down to a mind map or a graphic organiser. They lack faith in their ability to identify what the key points are. Generally, it's said the points should be about a quarter the length of the text. Often they want to work and spend time making notes, but it'll be of little use because it might be too long and also in their poor handwriting. They also say they don't like mind maps or graphic organisers, and this is often because they've not been taught how to use them. They may need help to see how good a learning tool they are. On the Study Skills workshop, we did a mind map exercise. We had a passage of about 300 words, and we worked with them to reduce it down to 60. And then we asked them, which would you find it easier, the 300 or the 60? And of course they saw the benefit of the reduction and would prefer the 60 words. And then we gave them a passage and advice about the layout of a mind map and asked them to do one. We asked the group to comment on each one, and constantly they saw the benefit of the clear ones, the less wordy ones. They may need such an exercise several times in order to gain confidence in doing a mind map. These are students who need to learn in a planned, structured, consistent way. Again, I mentioned cramming doesn't work. It leads to being overwhelmed and anxious, and sometimes their mind can go blank. They learn with patterns and understanding. Rote memory, like for the likes of Shakespearean quotations, can be very challenging. They may know it the night before, but it becomes vague by the next day. Here are some memory techniques that might help. Multisensory learning, learning using as many senses as possible. So DVDs, tapes, podcasts may help here. For some students, they learn by writing it out, or two of my lads learned by saying it aloud. That's what made it copper fastened in their heads. Others might recite something and pace up and down at the same time. Getting the big picture is very useful, having an overview of the subject and where this piece of learning fits in. It makes sense of what has to be learned and makes for a better use of time. Mnemonics are a memory aid, where a word or sentence is made up to help them remember the key points. Examples are the likes of Fat Dad for the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, or Holmes for the Great Lakes of the States. Another one is Richard of York gave battle in vain for the colours of the rainbow. It prompts the recall of information. Hooks for learning. This way, a student would use a strength to help them remember something that they have difficulty with. For example, I have difficulty remembering numbers, including, say, passwords for banks. I have a good memory for history, so all my passwords are historical dates. Some students may find it exceptionally difficult to learn material off by heart. They know it the night before, and by morning it is mixed up. So try to reduce the amount of rote learning. So many students that I know and worked with over the years were doing higher level English and found the poetry and the Shakespearean quotations exceptionally difficult. There was no way they would be able to recall all the ones the teachers indicated. We worked together to reduce the list to maybe from 100 to 40. There was some chance that they would know these ones. It is better that they remembered 40 accurately than 100 poorly. The student could make a list of key points they have particularly difficulty with, such as the spelling of names in the history of art or scientific equations. And then the morning of the exam, it would be this information that they would go over, so to be fresh in their minds. Flashcards can really help, such as Study Stack or Quizlet or Blockit. Here I show an example from Study Stack, and on one side you have the list that the teacher has made up, and on the other side you have the flashcard that they can use in order to get that into long-term memory. Grouping and visualization may help for memory. Some students with dyslexia, there might be a limit to the amount of separate items they can remember easily. One way to do this is to break information into groups. So if there are 10 items in a list, break it into 2 groups of 5. Here's an example I did on the Study Skills workshop with students. I put up this slide and I gave them 1 minute to remember as much as possible before taking it down. Then I would ask them, how many items do you remember? Usually the average was 6 or 7. Then I did the same exercise with this list of different items, but this time it was broken into 3 groups: the garden, the bathroom, and the school. Their scores usually doubled. Breaking it into groups helped. Then with this list we looked at other ways they might help them to remember. One was to make up a mnemonic. For example, in the middle group it could be the 4 T's, the 2 S's and a B for the bathroom. Another key way to remember was visualization, making a picture in the mind that would aid recall. For the first group of words, they could see the garden with the grass and the shrubs and the daffodils and the equipment lying on the grass. These pictures stay in the mind and make recall easier. The use of colour in images will help, such as in a diagram of the heart to show red for the arteries coming away and blue for the veins going back to the heart. Games can help in developing memory. and things like this. First of all, I'd say the game of cards, that's the pairs, and the cards are face down and they have to get pairs from the set of cards. Or this one, which has 20 items in a box, and you give them 60 seconds and you cover it up again, and then you ask them to count how many they can remember. And there'll be different amounts. But then you could ask the most successful students, the ones that remembered most, how do they do it? And have a discussion about whether it was links or whether it was visualization or rhyme or mnemonics that helped. Sometimes the student does not see the point in revision, but revision plays a large part in the memory of key points, and particularly for these students where memory is a key difficulty. I would make the point to them that the first time they learn something, it might take 20 minutes. But if they don't revise it, it begins to fade from memory. Here I give an example. You might only remember 25% a month later. But if they revise that information, they can go over it in far less time to bring it back into their minds. And if they revise it again, that time needed is even shorter. And that is why teachers give weekly and monthly tests, so the students revise regularly. Such revision habits allow them remember the work from 2 years of the Leaving Cert for the final exam. Here I'm moving on to writing. The first thing is to think about is understanding the question. There are two tasks here. One is, do they understand the words used in questions, such as compare, enumerate, illustrate, etc. And then secondly, have they broken down what the question is asking them to do, questioning the question. Here I have two resources on the vocabulary used in the questions for exams. One is from ELSIP, which is the English Language Support Programme, and among the many resources it has the vocabulary used in exams and exercise based on that vocabulary. The second one is a page of words that are used in exam questions, and you might find that useful. Then we are looking at ways to break down the question and know that we are answering it correctly. The bug technique, and I give a link for it, is one way to do it. And there is the question, and the B in bug stands for you box the word that is the type of answer that is required. Then you underline the key words in the question, and then you glance back and make sure that you understand the question. Coming back to this slide, then after the bug technique, I'm saying, what is this question asking me to do? And I'm using highlighting and numbering for it. So this is a question from Leaving Cert English that we used on the Study Skills workshop. We asked the students to plan their answer to this question, but we realised they couldn't see the structure in the question. Teachers can see it immediately. So when they planned, their answers were rambling and off the point. So we taught them to use colouring and numbering to see the structure of the question. Now they could easily see the 3 points that they're being asked about: the engaging narrative, the lyrical beauty, and the concrete realism, and they could see the relevance in planning their answers. Such analysis of the wording of a question would help across all subjects. And from it, they then had their paragraph structure. Next, what helps the students and gives them confidence is to make out checklists of possible points, so they don't have to do the thinking on the day in the exam. They are prepared and armed with items that they can look for in order to answer questions. Here I include some items about humour and drama, and these would be items that they could look for in the piece to see, could I find these, and then I'll be able to write about it. Here is a checklist of things to look at about style. Now, style is quite important in Leaving Cert English, and the students doing the course and the workshop were generally doing higher level English. I would ask them about what makes up style, and I would be lucky if they came up with 3 items. That would make it difficult on the day in the exam to look and consider style in a piece, whereas if they have a list like this and they can look for items from this list, it will help them. And then here, the last one is poetry, and it's very helpful if they have a list of points that you could look and analyse a poem under these points and then be able to answer a question on it. As I said in the beginning, paper 1 in Leaving Cert English poses challenges for many of the students who did the workshop. It was meant to relax the student into the exam because it is only comprehension and essay writing. However, for many of the students, it was the biggest challenge of all. They felt far more confident in the subjects where their knowledge would help them. Here they face the unknown. Reading and essay writing are key challenges. So I developed a strategy to help reduce the amount of reading for them. There are 3 texts, first of all, in the comprehension section with an A and B question on each one. They have to do an A from one text and a B from another. I would say from the start, don't read the text. Look at the B questions first. Decide which is the easiest for you. Look at, perhaps, maybe 5 diary entries would be easier than writing a persuasive argument. Decide on that B. Then look at the A questions on the other 2 texts. Which would be easiest for you? Decide on that A. Now, on that A, look at it, read the title, the introduction and any illustrations. Having questions in your head about what you might read will make it easier to understand the text. Now read the text and then answer the questions on the A and then go on to the B. Now we are on to writing the essay, which is on that paper. And a couple of ideas here. One came from a tutor of people with dyslexia, and what she suggested was that you make up an imaginary character that you know in great detail, and perhaps you know his 2 friends, you know his music, his career plans, what he likes in school, his parents, you know so much about him. Then, if on the day in the exam you are going to do the short story, you have someone you can put into that short story and know an awful lot about it. It's like being prepared for that. Secondly, I'd say to you, certainly the best answers in English are written if you're quoting your own views or your own experience. But for some of the students with dyslexia, they can get stuck on that. So it doesn't really matter. Write about an experience. The examiner won't know if it happened or did not happen to you. If you're putting ideas down and you're brainstorming at home, a useful idea is to use Post-its. And you put your ideas on Post-its and then you can reorganize the Post-its. And then using graphic organizers to help plan your essay or answers can help. Here's a graphic organizer that could help write a more even essay about a particular thing, such as achieving a sporting triumph. And you put the stages in so that you have the entire event covered in the plan. Here's another graphic organizer that would help you if you're writing a debate style essay. On one side you could have the points for, the other side the points against, and then at the end you have the grey area. So here's a list of essays from a paper in the past, and I would talk you through it. I actually think, looking at this, the first one, writing a personal essay about overcoming failure or difficulties, difficult. Writing a short story, certainly if I had my character prepared, I could put him into that and I have enough to write about. The next one, representing Ireland at an international youth conference, write the speech you would deliver, that you would describe second level education today. Unless you know an awful lot about second level education, I'd leave it aside. Writing a light-hearted or a serious account of a painful or embarrassing experience, I'd be inclined to leave that to one side. But then, write a personal essay about the importance in your life of one of the following. Ambition, the home place, simple pleasures. Well now, if I look at my home place and I can think of 5 aspects of it, and I can write 5 paragraphs about those 5 aspects and write 10 sentences, I have a structure. Or simple pleasures, if I can think of 5 or 6 simple pleasures and write 10 sentences about each of them, I will have some structure to write. Now we are on to writing the essay, which is on that paper. And a couple of ideas here. One came from a tutor of people with dyslexia, and what she suggested was that you make up an imaginary character that you know in great detail, and perhaps you know his 2 friends, you know his music, his career plans, what he likes in school, his parents, you know so much about him. Then, if on the day in the exam you are going to do the short story, you have someone you can put into that short story and know an awful lot about it. It's like being prepared for that. Secondly, I'd say to you, certainly the best answers in English are written if you're quoting your own views or your own experience. But for some of the students with dyslexia, they can get stuck on that. So it doesn't really matter. Write about an experience. The examiner won't know if it happened or did not happen to you. If you're putting ideas down and you're brainstorming at home, a useful idea is to use post-its. And you put your ideas on post-its and then you can reorganize the post-its. And then using graphic organizers to help plan your essay or answers can help. One idea is to check with the teacher that your planning is on target. So you could show her your plan and say, is this going to answer the question? Another interesting one is to write the essay with the key sentence for each paragraph only, because it's an exercise that actually gets you to think through the work that the key sentence does and the work that each paragraph does. If you get stuck beginning the essay and find it hard to write the introduction, leave a gap and write it in later. If you're writing the essay and you can't spell a word, don't stop, leave a gap, let the ideas still continue to flow and come back to the spelling later on. And I would encourage you, if you were doing an essay for homework in 6th year, try to do them under the same time constraints that you will find in the exam itself. It's no good writing brilliant essays if it takes you 2 or 3 times as long as you will get in the exam itself. You've got to practice working under the time constraints. Proofreading work that you have written with another person can be very helpful. However, you need to feel comfortable with that person, but you do learn so much. I've done it with students, with myself, and with my own lads. One of mine was at college and writing a thesis for his master's. He had not learned very much about grammar, punctuation, and sentence construction at school. He was too busy coping with reading. But when we proofread together, he understood the mistakes and they didn't appear again. He had the room in his head at the age of 20 to learn about these things. Develop the habit of reading for maybe 15 minutes a day. It will develop reading speed, stamina, comprehension, and vocabulary. And reading is such a key skill for life. When reading, prepare for the task in hand with a pen and highlighters to mark key points, or be ready with a notebook to take down some key points. For some students where visual stress can seem to make letters shimmer or move, coloured overlays may help in the reading task. Digital copies of textbooks are very useful, where the text can be read aloud as you read. And this leads me to the amazing resource of Bookshare Ireland. Set up by Vision Ireland and the Department of Education, it has 1.3 million books available in alternative formats for people with print or vision difficulties. Print difficulties is dyslexia, so students with dyslexia have access to this huge resource. Alternative formats include, say, audio or audio with highlighting of words in the text or larger fonts, etc. And textbooks are now available through it. The word subvocalization is where you say the words at the back of your throat when reading. I need to read aloud if I'm going to proofread my own work, but this isn't possible in a classroom or in an exam hall. By using the 2 senses, your eyes and the back of your throat, it may reduce making mistakes when reading exam questions. If you are going to read aloud for some reason, ask for the piece beforehand and practice it, and maybe break the words you find difficult to say into syllables. Here is a reading method which improves comprehension. There are several reading methods, but the SQ3R is one of the top ones. The idea of it is to put you into the zone before you read something, and therefore it follows that it'll make more sense to you when you start reading. So what it says is, the S stands for survey. Look at it, look at the headings, the subheadings, the pictures, the last paragraph. Then Q stands for question. What am I going to read in this? What answers will I get to questions? Then you go in and read it, but you're already in the zone. When you finish reading it, you recite the answers to the questions you raised, and then sometime later you come back and recall it. Here are some ideas about spelling. The first is quite useful if you come across a new word and you don't know how to pronounce it. Put it into how do you say, and you will hear it pronounced correctly. Then technology is wonderful for spelling, with spelling checks and software such as Grammarly, which checks the grammar and spelling. It also picks up if you use a word in the wrong context, such as using affect when you mean to use effect. If there are spellings you really need to know, you use mnemonics to help you remember them, such as there is a rat in separate. If you have difficulties remembering the alphabet. Use dictionaries that have the alphabet on every page. Otherwise, use a bookmark with the alphabet. Students on the workshop found the next two a great help: Latin and Greek, plurals and meanings. Firstly, Latin and Greek plurals. I'd asked the group of students the plural of fungus, and some of them might know that it was fungi, but for most they just felt there was chaos out there with some words. They know you add s or es to make a plural, and then you've got all these unusual ones. And then I'd show them this table of the 9 plurals coming from Latin and Greek, and it made sense to them. For example, the bottom one is us, and it turns to I, so fungus becomes fungi. The second from the bottom is and it turns to a, so bacterium becomes bacteria. And suddenly it all made sense to them. And in particularly, I would say that for Leaving Cert Biology, where there are so many Latin and Greek words, it's very useful. Up to 70% of English words comes from Latin and Greek roots. Knowing these roots is particularly valuable to students with dyslexia for 2 reasons. These students learn best when they can see patterns and understand what they are learning. Many do not read for pleasure then, and as a result do not have an extensive vocabulary. As a result, they often come across words they don't recognise. Giving them an understanding of the Latin and Greek roots that make words will help them to see how a word is constructed, how to pronounce it, how to guess at its meaning, and is a tool to help with spelling it. For example, the use of the ending CID means killing, so it's easier to find the meanings of words like homicide or infanticide or herbicide with that. Knowing the Latin and Greek roots of words is particularly helpful in biology and senior cycle, where there's a huge number of new words throughout the course with Latin and Greek origins. Here I give a link to a website giving Latin and Greek origins for biology. Here is a checklist for the exams. Firstly, have a timetable in a prominent place and check it and double check it quite often. Beside it, have a list of what is needed for each exam, the equipment, etc. Go over the marking scheme for the paper and the time allocation for questions so you know how much time to give the different elements in the paper. Go over flashcards in the morning for things that you find difficult, such as maybe key vocabulary, the names of artists in the history of art, or quotations for your Shakespearean play, etc. Take a few moments at the start of the exam to skim the whole paper to get a feel for it. And then always remember to question the question. Break down what it is asking you to do. It is well worth spending time doing that before you start to plan your answer. And always plan your answers. Make sure you avoid telling the story or telling all you know. You've got to be answering the question. If you're running out of time, put down the key points and leave space between so that you can come back and fill in more if you have time later on. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the analysis of corrected papers. I would come across students and they wouldn't know how they did in the exam. Even after getting the papers back, they wouldn't know the parts they did well in and the parts that let them down. An analysis of the paper can help. Here's a question with 3 sections. The mark is shown, and then the total marks for each section, and then the percentage the student got. So the fact that they got an overall percentage of 45 cloaks the fact that part C got 66 and part B was 25%. This way, they know what they have to do to work to improve the grade. The Dyslexia Association of Ireland has a lot of information on its sites, and I give the site names there. And also in link 7, they have put their webinars up on YouTube, and they include 6 study skills webinars that you might find useful. In conclusion, I hope you found some of these strategies useful for the future.